The Mental Health Series is brought to you by Micro Gains and Dominion Strength. Both are longtime friends and sponsors of the Barbell Logic podcast, and neither hesitated for a second in wanting to sponsor a series that they know is incredibly important to so many people. Both companies are true small businesses, American-owned, and 100% of all their products are made here in the United States. You'll hear more about that later in the show. For the finest quality fractional plates, visit microgains.com. That's with a Z, microgains with a Z.com. And for the highest quality leather belts, go to dominionstrengthtraining.com. Both use discount code LOGIC for a significant discount off their products exclusively for Barbell Logic listeners. Barbell Logic family, I'm super excited to bring you this new series on mental health that combines previously released podcasts with new material. One of the things we've done is we've re-released previous podcasts with Dr. David Puder, psychiatrist, a regular guest on this podcast who's brought his expertise and wisdom to myself, certainly, and the Barbell Logic family. He also hosts his own podcast, the Psychiatry and Psychotherapy podcast, which I strongly recommend you go check out. You can find the link to his podcast in the show notes. To this great material already, we've added 3 new podcasts covering topics including overcoming negativity, coaching and lifting with depression, and grit. We've brought Dr. Puder back on for 2 new podcasts and also brought on 2 new guests, Brooke Haubenstricker, a Barbell Logic staff coach and professional barbell coach here, and Sarah Shanahan, our registered dietitian here at Barbell Logic. So without further ado, I am proud to bring you this series on mental health. Enjoy. You're listening to Barbell Logic, brought to you by Barbell Logic Online Coaching, where each week we take a systematic walk through strength training and the refining power of voluntary hardship.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this series. I'm Niki Sims, and joining me today are Gillian Ward and Sarah Shanahan. Gillian is our head nutrition coach and very good friend of mine. You'll recognize her from our nutrition series. And Sarah is our registered dietitian consultant. We wanted to have Sarah on the podcast today to add her unique perspective as a professional and as a human. In addition to consulting for us, Sarah works with companies to develop wellness strategies for their employees and is a certified mindful leader. And we love what Sarah does because she believes that food can provide both pleasure and the healthy fuel that our bodies require. And she's passionate about educating people to find that balance. So while none of us are mental health professionals, each of us are professionals who work with people like you, who are trying to make changes physically, and that requires behavior changes. But those behavior changes, they tend to be strongly linked with attitude and perception and awareness. So our goal for this today is not to provide medical advice, but rather to share what we've learned about creating conditions for healthy relationships with oneself, with food, and even with training. So let's start by defining that. So I'm going to kick things off, and I want to hear from each of you, Sarah and Gillian. What demonstrates to you that either you or your clients have what you would consider a healthy relationship with their self? Maybe thinking of like body image or their mindset, and then also with food. So let's start with you, Sarah.
Well, first, thanks for having me on today. I think that's a really good question, and I don't think that it has one particular answer because I think a lot of that has to do with the individuality of each person. However, I do think that there's some key things that we could probably build on to get that started. But, positivity in general, I think, is an outlook that when people express positivity or gratitude, you hear that thrown around a lot this time of year in particular, you actually sort of start to breed it, if you will. And I think the exact opposite can happen. So if there is some negativity or discomfort or dislike, it starts to then breed that. And I think some of that is just like storytelling. It's like we tell ourselves we say one thing,
Mhm.
And then we repeat it, and then it just becomes part of our story. So if I say to myself, I can't do this thing, or, my legs are too short to go run this race, or whatever it may be, then I've just created that storyline for myself. So now I
Mhm.
have this sort of negative image and perception of myself. And then that breeds it over and over and over again. And so, from my side, when working with clients, I think picking apart, really hearing what they're saying, because most people are going to share some of those things, whether they are aware that they're doing it or not. So, listening for words like bad and good, applying morality to decisions that they're making, or applying morality to themselves, like, I chose to eat this and therefore I am bad. People aren't typically saying those words, but they're saying, I was bad. I did this thing. I was bad. And it might be that they had, a couple bites of chocolate cake.
Mhm.
And so, keeping an open mind and sort of a listening mindset to hear what people are saying can really help tune into where they are currently
Mm.
with their mentality around that.
Yeah. What do you think, Jillian?
I like Sarah's answer. And I'm going to add to that so much of it, in addition to positivity, is perspective. So, how do we see something? Is the glass half full? Is it half empty? Is it, I just had a donut, it was delicious? Or is it, I
Mhm.
can't believe I just ate that donut? So I think, we could look at things, and we could look at things differently. The same person could look at things differently, different times in the day. You could wake up one morning and feel great about something and have healthy
Yeah.
attitudes and behaviors, and the next morning it'd be different. Or you start the day one way, and during the day your blood sugar crashes and you're hangry, and that same thing that you looked at differently 3 hours before comes something else to you. So I think keeping, encouraging positivity and encouraging, I'm going to say positive reward, but I don't like the idea behaviorally of of punishment. Like, it's not the way I don't know if this is making sense, but it's not the way I would work with a client. I like reinforcing, positive rewards for yourself. And that doesn't need to come in the way of food, but something always kind of taking a look from the bright side, as opposed to, I think, an unhealthy or negative behavior is when we punish ourselves for things. And I think looking at, when it comes to working with clients, if they have healthy attitudes, it's looking at, what is their motivator? What's motivating them? Are they motivated by fear? Are they motivated by guilt? Are they motivated by kind of negative motivators? And can we turn that into something positive for them?
I like that. That makes me think of how I know for me, if I'm in like a negative space, or if I'm talking to a client who I can tell like things are really strained, it's like we're focused on the past, right? We're focused on something that was. Whereas when things are going well and like I'm in a good mood, I can tell my clients are in a good place. It's like we're more present to what we're doing at the moment. And there's also positivity looking forward. It's not like we're stuck ruminating on stuff that was, but rather we're excited about exactly what is without deciding if it's good or bad. And we're excited about where things are going.
I agree. And I think you could take somebody that is in a negative headspace and feeling bad about things and encourage positive behaviors and shift that. So, we're working with people of all kinds of personalities, and they're going to be people. We've had clients that are down about everything. The question is, coaching them, do you play into that?
Mm.
Or do you use some kind of positive behavioral stuff to shift that mindset for them?
And I think too, helping clients to evaluate those thoughts that they're having, because again, it's back to like, we tell ourselves these things, so we start to believe them. I mean, that's not always the reason why we might not be in a great mood, but when we're starting to, feel the negativity, and Niki, to your point, not being in the moment about what's going on, is really trying to put some framework around these like constant thoughts that they're having and neutralize them a little bit,
Mhm.
and there's some great behavioral therapy techniques that, a professional can do with you. But I think it's something that, we as individuals can also adopt just on an everyday basis. It's part of it is recognizing that you're having this thought, right? And sometimes that's the hardest thing. We get so caught up in the way that we're feeling that it's hard to take that little peek outside and see inside. But, as working with our clients, maybe we can help them to see that it's just a thought. So it's not actually causing anything to happen. So how do we recognize that thing and help shift it to something else that might be, again, more neutral? I think it's kind of hard to go from really negative to really positive in, the matter of minutes, but just, neutralizing some of those things so that they just become normal. It's okay. It's fine.
Do you have an example of doing that with a client that would be okay in the realms of our discussion, or even for yourself?
I mean, yeah. So thinking about food again and going back to kind of that idea of some foods are good and some foods are bad, which is something I work with people a lot on as a dietitian. And when you can, whatever that food may be that you're identifying as bad, break apart the components. I love to go back to, in this case, the science of it. And what is that particular food doing for you or not doing for you? Or is it just something that is, a little bit of an extra? And again, how do we start to, normalize that? I don't think that's a very good example.
No, I really like that because that's actually really cool. Instead of the donut example, oh, I'm going to have a donut, which means this is stuff that fat people eat, or this is stuff that it's bad, it's on the sweets list. Well, let's just break down what is actually in it. And instead of it being a circle of guilt, it becomes a circle of gluten and sugar. And then you're okay, well, let's think about what those actually do for your body. I like that.
And also, again, maybe it's just the day to have a donut, Those probably shouldn't be every single day or all day, every day. But, maybe it is just the day that you're going to have a donut and enjoy it. As to what Gillian said, it's okay to enjoy food that feels, forbidden because you've been told by the media or you've been told by, any number of people that it is, quote unquote bad. But that doesn't mean that it's not ever allowed into your healthy and balanced eating plan. And so kind of tying that back in, when we stop to look at food as good or bad and start to look at what it is doing to help us maybe, or maybe not help us, it takes away the then I am good or I am bad because I made this decision.
And that makes me think of something you said, Gillian, where we have to go back to what their motivating factors are. If we're going to be eating in a certain way, it should be in alignment with what really drives us. And so, Gillian, you've had some great discussions on trying to get to the bottom of what really drives a person. And it seems like a lot of anxiety and resistance is sometimes when our actions aren't really lining up with what we believe is important to us. Maybe it's because we don't actually know what's truly important to us.
So one of the things I'll ask, and to get to understand the client and be able to work with them, is really where we go wrong with that is when people with their behaviors don't line up with their expectations of themselves. So if someone feels like they're being bad, it's because they're falling short of their expectation. So do I know what that expectation is? So when I'm working with a client, I want to know, what is your expectation of yourself with regard to training, with regard to diet, with regard to meal prep, with regard to, your family, any of those things. And then what is my expectation of you? So is my expectation as coach lining up with the expectation of the client? And a lot of the times when a client is having these negative feelings, it's because they're either falling short of their expectation. Whether you go into the gym and say, I'm going to squat 3x5 at this weight today, and you feel bad because you fell short of your expectation. So I think kind of, somebody to start kind of looking at that is kind of just to take a look at their day with regard to those things that are important to them. What are my expectations? So, with something like nutrition, if somebody's trying to gain weight, they may feel like they didn't do well that day because they underate for the day, right? They fell short of their expectation of hitting their grams of protein. So we see that a lot in this community. They punish themselves. I didn't do well today because I didn't eat, 200 grams of protein, and that's negative feelings. And then there's somebody else that overate based on their expectations and whatever their beliefs are. So, I mean, I think we're coming back to this being such an individual thing. But if I had to say one thing, it's really, understanding the individual that you're working with and really challenging them to understand those things about themselves.
I'm quiet because that just makes me think of a million more questions. It's really good. Like, I wonder if each of us have had times when I know each of us have had times when this has happened, but we have goals, we have stuff that we want to accomplish, and then we end up having like a day or a week where like we can't get any of it done. And even though we set those intentions, we set those goals because of something that was really important to us, it's like we have these moments where that gets really shaken. It's like this existential crisis, and I'm curious what each of you have maybe done in the moment to what you said a few minutes ago, Sarah, like identify that negative story that you might be telling to kind of have that almost out of body experience, be like, oh, no, hold on. You're just telling yourself a story. Does it come through like talking to someone else? Do you get there through journaling? Do you have to have a good cry? What's worked for you to kind of take yourself out of those places?
A million different things. How about that? We'll say a million different things. Some days it might be a good cry. Other days it might be, I need to pull the covers up to my neck. But I think one of the things that, for me personally, that I have worked on a lot for myself, and I like to help other people to kind of think about this too, is again, like a positive inner voice, is sort of what I was saying at the beginning of if something doesn't work out, reframing if I'm having a negative thought, because we're all going to have those, right? It's not like we get cured of, we do all this work and we get cured of it. But, if that negative thought comes into my head, again, like acknowledging it and then trying to reframe it. So I'm not a total failure if I had a week's worth of workouts planned and I only got one in because my family took over, or unfortunately work took over, or some other thing just sort of happened. It's a bummer for sure, but I can also pick back up the next day and do that. I think that happens a lot with food and with exercise, is sort of sabotaging of something didn't go right. So, oh, well, it's all over. I've failed and I don't know where to go from here. I'm going to give up. I think that happens a lot more. I believe, I don't know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this too, but more with food and nutrition than I think sometimes with training, because food is something you have to deal with for, basically 24 hours a day rather than, this designated time that you're spending on your training.
I'm going to take Sarah's point and run with it. I feel like there's no need to sabotage the future based on the past. And the way I approach most of the behaviors in my life is the way we've talked about in the past. I approach training. Like, it's one rep at a time. You finish that rep, you learn from that rep, and you get an opportunity to move on to the next one. So, when I wake up, I tell myself, I'm blessed to be here. And throughout the day, I have an opportunity with everything I do to make a choice. And if I don't make the best choice, the next thing I do, I get to make a choice again, but not bring kind of the mistakes or the things I feel bad about from the past and let that determine the future. So if I made a poor choice at breakfast, rather than think, oh, well, the day is ruined, which takes a while to get there, I tell myself, guess what, Gillian, you have a choice the next time you put something in your mouth to make a better choice. And kind of like to look at everything as very fluid. The future hasn't happened yet, and I can choose. So I look at it kind of as a way, try to stay positive, thinking about being empowered with each step that I take. Like, am I going to choose a good meal? Am I going to do something good for myself? Am I going to read a book? And if I'm on a bad path for a while, like, I own it and I'm going to kind of reflect on it. And did I learn something from this? And sometimes that helps to motivate you to make better choices. And I think it's all kind of a continuum. Like, everything is not going to be perfect. And I think you need to make those mistakes and fall off any things you didn't want to eat and miss training sessions, kind of to find the amazing and valuable in the good. And it makes it, if you're perfect all the time, well, I don't know. I guess there are some people that are perfect with that stuff all the time, but it's even,
there's no perfection. That's not a thing. It doesn't exist.
But people that could always nail it on those things. And success doesn't come from nailing it 100% of the time. And Niki, we've talked about this on the training podcast, is that I've had great success in athletics, but like a great percentage of those things were failures that I learned from. Every meal is not going to be perfect. You could still get where you're going and have those missteps along the way. It's not linear.
I fully agree. And I wanted to say like 7 different things while you were talking, but one of them is definitely failure. Like people aren't successful unless they have failed. So again, there is nothing that is perfect. Like that's what if there was some sort of perfection, what else would we have to work towards, And I thought about that as I was training for marathons, like watching someone fly past me running so fast and so gracefully and looks like they were putting no effort into it. And I remember very clearly having a thought in my head. I was like, I want to be that person. And then I actually had another, and I was very young when this happened. I had another thought that was, well, if it was always that easy, would I want to keep doing it? There's something about challenge and effort, and like it gives us some satisfaction when we put in that work to actually see something come out. But the other thing I was thinking of, and Niki, you talked about it, and Gillian, you just did as well, is this sort of being in the moment. And that is, I feel like anyone that's on any social media these days is seeing all this stuff about mindfulness and staying in the moment. And I think that word turns some people off, mindfulness or meditation. But that's really what that is. It's like, how do you rein in sort of your thinking that's going all over the place, whether it's to the future, to the past? You can't just actually be here and be in that moment, is really learning how to be mindful of your time.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to share a personal story that I almost made an Instagram post about, and then I didn't, which I think we should talk about social media in a minute. But like I had to take a big deload week from training because I got sick with COVID and I'm just like really tired. And so I had like this moment of frustration where I was just like, oh, I just can't wait for a normal training block again. And, it didn't last too long. I didn't pout for very long. And what I tend to do is I daydream a lot. So I go through scenarios where I lash out on that moment of frustration. I just like tell my coach like, oh, I'm just so sick of these setbacks because I like hurt my back early this year too. And I'm just like kind of feeling like a big old victim. So I like ran through that scenario in my head. And then I ran through the scenario of like just actually thinking of what am I actually missing? So I was like, oh, well, maybe I'm missing those brief moments of time where training actually went well. And, it's just this imagination in my head. Like a lot of the time things aren't perfect, but when you're in one of these moments of just like sadness or self-pity, or you just make up these stories where everything was perfect at one time. And like what you just said, Sarah, like nothing's ever perfect. You just make something up. You're missing little pieces of things, and then you decide that that was the perfect scenario. So I just went through things that I was missing, and I was missing like training for a competition and things feeling good, not being in a pandemic. And it's like, okay, well, what of that can I control? Not very much, but I can control being excited about training. I can control getting to train right now in this moment. I can control pouting about it or not. Because, you have the choice then to act like someone who things happen to, or you get to act like someone who has the ability over their choices. And so it's that little spiral where I think I actually even heard your voice at one point, Gillian, like, just everything is just one rep. Like get your one rep in, and that's what matters at that moment.
I think that's so important. Like the word, like what can you control, especially when things feel really out of control because something isn't going the way that you expected it to go. So back to those expectations. And it's just sort of like a spiraling that can happen. And again, being able to take that moment, which sometimes, like I said, I think is the hardest part, is being able to get to the place where you can take the moment to say, wait, let me check myself, and what can I actually hold on to here? What is going to be okay? So learning to get to that place where you have the moment of thinking of like, pump the brakes and start to think about it a little bit more.
Yeah. Gillian, you've talked a lot about journaling. Have you found that's really helpful for your clients to just get stuff out on paper so that they can make observations?
For the people that are willing to do it, yes. I think initially it's somewhat of a nuisance, but you talked about, remembering a time. Like we always think the grass is always greener. So the journal will also help us reflect on reality. Like, right now, I'm not making that much progress in the gym. I'm like, I remember when I was younger and I used to be able to do this. And then I look back and I'm like, I was never able to do that. So I find it.
Yeah, like we romanticize the past, right?
Yes.
We really do.
That like never even happened. It's made up past that we have.
Our memories are a little cloudy and they somehow turn to something that really didn't ever happen.
The other thing, that I find the journal helps with is if you're adding emotional weight to the bar. Let's talk about just journaling in terms of your workouts. When you're bringing something else like the stress, whatever you're coming into the gym, like this past week, it's been exceptionally cold here, sub-zero temperatures. And that will go in there into the journal. Like it's this many degrees today. The heater had to be turned on 90 minutes before, whatever. And what's funny is it'll go back and it'll bring you back in terms of memories to that moment. But it also, like I said, when you're adding other things that are not just because nothing is in a vacuum, your training session's not in a vacuum, a meal is not in a vacuum. I think journaling helps to understand where you are. And sometimes things will come down. Sometimes I may even write in the journal something that I'm afraid that I'm going to forget later. So I don't like to personally bring my phone into the gym because we talked about things that you could control and can't control. I could control leaving my phone outside of the gym for that time, so I'm not disturbed. I know for me, I have a physical reaction when a text alert goes off, when my phone's beeping and other stuff, and I get distracted. So that's one of those things that I could control to make my life better in that moment. So that training journal, I may have a thought, which is in between sets of squats, as silly as this sounds, is, oh my, we don't have eggs. I need to go get eggs. And it might just say eggs in my journal. But you know what? That kept me from running into the house, writing a note in my phone. And once I wrote that down, I knew I would check my journal before I left the gym. And when I got under the bar to squat for the next set, I would stop thinking about the eggs. So that journal is kind of a whole lot to me.
Oh man. Yeah, that really helps you feel present.
Did that make any sense?
Yes.
Yep.
I would love to read one of your training journals.
Yeah, and you have a space to put it. Yeah. See all your to-do lists in it. I think when we're exercising, our brains just start to work in different ways and stuff pops up from your subconscious all the time. It can be that you need eggs from the grocery store, or it could be that you haven't dealt with something troubling that happened at work. It all bubbles up. I love that idea of keeping your physical handwritten journal so that you can make those notes and try to put them away for that moment and get back to focusing on what you're doing.
Have you ever noticed that the smallest weight plates you can find at a gym is 2.5 pounds? One of the things that everyone needs when they're first starting out on their journey of strength is fractional plates. That's plates smaller than 2.5 pounds, so that you can continue to get wins in the gym every single session for as long as possible by adding strength and muscle 1 pound at a time. Mike from microgains.com is a true American-owned small business. All of his fractional plates are super high quality, and all of them are made in Pennsylvania and shipped by the owner himself. So when you support Microgains, you support a real blue-collar American trying to survive and support his family in the midst of a pandemic. There are definitely other fractional plates out there, but none with a story like Mike's. I've used them all, but I use his fractional plates and dumbbell fractional plates literally every single workout. And I'm thankful to have a company of Microgains quality as a supporter of the podcast. For the finest fractional plates on the planet, head over to microgains.com and use discount code LOGIC for 10% off any order. That's microgainz.com and use discount code LOGIC for 10% off any order.
So what you just said about having a place to put it, I love that for my thoughts. And I also love that for my schedule. I've found when even some of my colleagues or my sister, or when I'm floundering of just feeling overwhelmed, and then of course I feel like I'm just not doing enough and that makes me anxious, that I have to make sure that I have structure in place for me to get things done that I want to do. So I think we've talked about this before, the importance of having certain structures in place and even boundaries that kind of create better environments for us to be positive. What are some things that you guys have noticed about structure and boundaries that have had a helpful impact on yourselves and your clients?
I live by my calendar, and it's for that reason. I mean, I would never get anything done if it wasn't, I shouldn't say anything. That is very like all or nothing, right? But I would not be as successful. And I find this is actually interesting. I mean, this is just personal. My Monday through Friday is so scheduled with client meetings and um, colleague meetings and Zoom all day, every day now. And I get to Saturday, and if I don't have a plan, especially now during COVID and, being pretty socially distanced, if I don't have a plan, I will sort of wander around my house trying to figure out what it is that I need to be doing,
What's my
and
purpose?
it is basically, it's really helpful to just keep a little bit of a list of what, I just want to accomplish on a Saturday or a Sunday these days.
Mm-hmm.
Boundaries, I feel like, is maybe a whole other
That's a big one.
topic. So I I do want to come back to that though. I'm curious
Okay.
to hear what Gillian has to say though.
I actually think Sarah does an exceptional job. You inspire me, like with how you handle a work day. So for me, the big change happened, for years, I owned a gym and was the head coach where my schedule was set for me. I had clients at these hours, this is when I taught classes. This is when I opened the gym. This is when I closed the gym. And there was a whole lot of learning when I went to work online for Barbell Logic, maybe a little bit, a year and a half ago, going to working from home. A couple months ago, going to working from home where that wasn't, I didn't get in the car and leave my house and take my lunch with me and go to work and train clients, and learning that structure was everything. So what I've kept, even though I don't have to do it anymore, I still maintain the same schedule as I did pretty much when I owned the gym. And as crazy as it sounds, as I did like when I was in school, like I get up super early in the morning and I get my workout done early. I usually try to keep my meal times scheduled as a certain time in the day, and work has to end as a certain time. So I think that's something that's been challenging for people that have transitioned to working from home, is having that structure. That structure gets eroded so easily when the environment changes and, you're going to work like, in your dining room or on your couch. And it's also something that, we've discussed before, is that like work ends up living in the home with you unless you're able to set really firm boundaries. So I enjoy my structure. So for my day, my structure, my meals are structured. My little dessert time at night is structured. A phone call every evening since COVID started. Every evening I do a FaceTime phone call with my entire family at 7 p.m. That's part of the structure, and my workouts. And then everything else kind of is in blocks around that. And I find that for me, having that structure really reduces my anxiety. When I have days that I lose parts of that, if I miss a meal, if I don't get dressed for the day or something, like I start to spiral and get very anxious.
I fully agree with everything you said about structure, especially now. And we have been talking about this so much in terms of, the wellness I do with companies for their employees. I've been working from home since March 16th or whatever that Monday was. Everyone thought it was going to be 2 weeks, and here we are 9 months later. Is that right? Can I do math?
Yeah.
So I've had to do those same things and set up that structure for me, because I also am a morning exerciser. People think I'm nuts because I'm up, in the dark getting my workout in when I no longer have to commute, but it sets my day up. So I make sure I do that. I make sure when it is time for me to stop working, I actually have started shutting down my computer. I still have a cell phone that, pings. I turn that on silent, and I take my dog out for a walk so that I can, have that separate day. We've talked a lot about, is there, just sort of in general, is there a space in your home that can be your workspace that is not a space that you go into for other times? And I know that that is not possible for every person. I know that everyone's got different situations, but for me, it's my guest bedroom. It's also my gym. So it's my gym, guest bedroom, and my office. But I don't, it's not my dining room table,
Right.
it's not in my actual bedroom. So, I just happen to be lucky about that. But figuring out what those things are that are going to set you up for success and making them part of your schedule. I mean, do you need to put it in your calendar? Like, exercise at noon or walk your dog at 5:30 or whatever it is, so that it's something that gets done.
Yeah. And sometimes we just need that one little thing to get us going. Like the one little thing, like you said, shutting off your computer or having a different room of your house, or even just like a different chair where you work versus a chair that you sit at your table at when you do something else. But I feel like there's always, like we use that minimum effective dose concept for programming, but sometimes I feel like there's just one like minimum effective inertia. Like for some people, it's getting your shoes on to go to the gym,
Yep.
or it's putting something in the calendar. Like it's that one little action that's just like the gateway to a whole bunch of actions that if you thought of in full, it would be maybe a little overwhelming and a little off-putting. So it's like, make it small, try that one little thing.
It's that one rep that
Yeah.
Gillian was talking about.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's like being there, doing that one thing.
Jillian's
so you
one
can,
rep.
Yep, check it off and move on to the next thing.
I don't know if you ladies agree with me. I know what it is for me in terms of the one thing that sets the inertia for the day.
Ooh.
The reason I work out first thing in the morning is to put myself first. I can't be good to anyone until I've done right by myself.
I love that.
So if I spend the whole day, I feel like I'm a very empathetic person. I care so much about people. If I spend the whole day absorbing all of that, so like my rule is take care of my needs. When my needs are met, I could be of service and I could be a great friend. I could be a great coach to everybody else. But I think, when things start not feeling right, it's when I don't do that first. So that for me is why in the morning I always choose the day. And I'm like, this is my time. I'll give you everything I've got, but to do that, I need to take care of me. So in some ways, I think it's a little bit selfish, but I don't think I would be able to be as helpful to other people as I could if I didn't do that.
I think we need to reframe that word selfish. I think this is another thing kind of that we as humans do is we do something that is important for our mental well-being and our capacity to be good for other people and do right by them. And then we call it selfish, so it's instead of that, it's self-preservation, it's self-care, it's self-love. It is what we are doing and we are our most important people. Like nothing else can get done if we can't, take care of ourselves.
That makes me think of something that I'm very passionate about that I know both of you women are on the same page as me about, but a lot of people aren't, is an early bedtime. Like before we started recording this, Sarah was saying she likes to go to bed at like 8. I think Gillian goes to sleep at like 6:30 p.m. And I found that when I'm like making plans and doing stuff like that, like I've had to be very selfish about air quotes, I'm going to reframe that. I've had to be very protective about my bedtime, but that's something else we want to talk about today was sleep. Like sleep quality is just massive for just being able to function mentally throughout the day and to care about yourself and to care about others. So yeah, team sleep, early bedtime here.
Team sleep. Yeah. Team sleep, early bedtime. I had someone in my 20s, an old roommate, like my early 20s, right out of undergrad. I liked to go to bed at 9 then too, because I used to wake up at like 5:30. And I remember her saying to me, like, you're not 40. Well, lo and behold, here I am now, still doing that. And really happy about it. I'm no longer apologetic about it. I feel like I was apologetic about it for a long time. Again, but now I'm like, no, this is important to me to be able to do good,
Yes.
But sleep is key. Like if we don't sleep and if we don't get good quality sleep, we will never function mentally, emotionally, physically. Like everything breaks down and suffers because, the number of restorative processes, like I'm not even going to try to explain it, but the number of restorative processes that go on while we are at rest and in real, sleep rest, it's unbelievable, to even, it's like mind boggling to try to think about it. So And in today's world where we are, where we are, we're asked to do so much. We just talked about, this sort of blurry line. And when you're working from home between like your personal life and your work life, we are in front of screens. I mean, all day, even if you don't sit in front of a computer, you've got your phone,
TV.
There's all sorts of interesting things that are happening. Television in bedrooms. That's a thing that we're going to talk about here in a second. Yes. But yeah, it's so important to create a healthy sleep environment. And that's a physical environment, but it's also with decisions that you make around sort of that time also.
So let's dig into that.
Which I'm happy to get into.
Yeah. I want to hear like, these are the things that you can do to have great sleep environments and habits.
Yeah. So before we get into the actual like physical environment, I mean, stuff we put into our bodies. So I don't know if anyone else feels like, having a glass of wine or a beer or something else at the end of the day to relax, oh, I worked so hard, I deserve this, or I just need to like take a little bit of the edge off. Alcohol, unfortunately, inhibits the ability to get into restorative sleep. And it's actually really interesting because, I have had people try to fight me on this a lot, clients that are like, no, but I get really tired. And it's real interesting because it is a downer, but versus an upper caffeine. I'm going to talk about that one in a second. But because it inhibits the ability to get quality sleep, you could sleep for 10 hours and literally not wake up, but your quality of sleep will be less than it would have been if you didn't have alcohol in your system.
Such a bummer.
It's a bummer. It is a bummer. Because what are you going to start, having your glass of wine at noon? We don't live in France, right? So, I guess some people do, but the three of us don't. So there is that. And in all honesty, I've read everything from like 2 to 3 hours before bed to like up to 6 hours.
Oh,
so
wow.
I think you just have to monitor that one kind of on your, 6 hours becomes very unrealistic, right?
Yeah.
2 to 3 could be managed. It's also dependent on, the number of drinks that you're having, which I want to segue before I get to caffeine, which is a little bit of a no-brainer, but I want to explain a little bit, but segue to time of eating. So we should and there's no like, it's 8 p.m., it's too late to eat, it's going to cause me to gain weight. That's not a thing. That is not a real thing. However, we need like 2 to 3 hours after eating upright to digest properly.
Really?
And so if anyone has ever experienced heartburn or, reflux, any of those things, 2 to 3 hours upright before bed. And the real extreme, if you're really struggling, is like nothing else after that, including liquids, which is really hard. If you're trying to stay hydrated. But alcohol also is very acidic. So if you are struggling with any of those symptoms of heartburn or reflux, not only the 2 to 3 hours for the actual digestion, but to reduce the acidity level. So there's alcohol. There's meal and snack timing.
Okay, what about our other friend?
And then caffeine.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So caffeine really is the 6 hours. And I've had people that are like, but I could have like the strongest cup of coffee and put my head on the pillow and fall asleep. So some people are more sensitive than others. I've talked to people too that, if they have caffeine after 10 a.m., they're awake all night. So, everyone's got kind of different levels of sensitivity to that. But it is actually, even though it is an upper while alcohol is a downer, the same type of thing happens. Even if you could fall asleep right away, your sleep quality is just not going to be as good.
Yeah.
So we have, those sides of that. I typically recommend for most people to kind of leave caffeine at lunch and before. And if it's something that you're so accustomed to that you're not even aware that it's happening, it's kind of like the alcohol thing. Well, I could sleep all night and not wake up. Again, it's quality of sleep that we're talking about. So those 3 things alone, timing, alcohol, and caffeine, just figuring out where that can fit in can make a big change on its own.
That's cool.
And then you have your environment. Those are things that we actually, back to things we can choose to change. Those are things that we can actually choose to change and work on, right? Sleep environment is big, and sometimes this is a little bit harder. So typically you want a very dark, very cool room. And that's it. And not noisy. So quiet, dark, and cool. Or like a white noise kind of situation if you need it to, drown some other things out.
Do you know what it is about white noise? Why that works with people to keep them asleep?
It just I don't know, these are my words, not professional, but like neutralizes other noises that you might be hearing.
Okay.
So if you live in a noisy space, if you live in, New York, where I used to live, if you happen to live on a busy street, whatever it is, it just helps to kind of like take the edge off of maybe some of those things that kind of come and go that can
jolt,
kind of pop you in and out of sleep. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think it becomes a little bit of a safety blanket, maybe. You just get used to it. And so it's just something that you like need to sleep a little bit. So cool, dark, quiet environment. And then I think this is my last one, is blue light. Again, back to our screens, our TVs. So there is something about the blue light that, again, inhibits our ability sometimes to fall asleep or, again, to get that quality sleep. And so I think the focus needs to be on the quality sleep. And so that is computers, televisions, tablets, phones, all of the things that, we do. And I always ask people, like, what's the last thing you do before you go to bed? And it's either like the TV is on in the room, or I'm on my phone, I'm checking my emails, or I'm just setting my alarm, or whoops, words from friends or whatever, popped up and I need to, get back on this. And I heard a guy speak that I thought was really interesting. A lot of people recommend an hour before bed to turn all that stuff off so that you just get settled into it. You get into a better place so that you're able to fall asleep and, again, get that better sleep quality. But I thought this was very interesting. I heard someone speak and he was talking about, when you pick up your phone, even if it's just to turn your alarm on, you see all of those other things.
Yeah.
And our phones are like gamified. They are inviting. All that stuff is developed intentionally to keep us engaged in it. And so thinking about how much time you're spending because you turned your alarm on, how many other things you might have like just checked for one more time, before you go to bed. And this recommendation was to get like a regular alarm clock. So it's an interesting thing too. But really it's the blue light that come from our screens is kind of problematic for quality sleep also.
I'm listening to you say these things and they resonate so much. And I'm going through the checklist of things that I do and that I don't do, and like how I arrived at those things. Like what you just said about white noise. Like, I don't know if you guys have experienced this. Like my husband has very bad tinnitus. And even to me, this sound, I moved someplace incredibly quiet and the sound of silence is deafening and terrifying. So, you go from a place with city and all these noises, and then possibly someplace where you hear nothing. So we have a fan all the time in the room. And it's just something like, if I go someplace and there's not a ceiling fan, like a hotel or something, I have a hard time sleeping. And one of the rules that we've always had is the bedroom is just that. It's not a multifunction room. Like, that's all the bedroom ever will be. Work doesn't get done in the bedroom. TV watching doesn't get done in the bedroom. Crafting doesn't get done in the bedroom. Like, that is the bedroom. And that's
Crafting,
where it starts.
That's what the kids are calling it these days.
Yeah.
Wrapping Christmas. I'm thinking about wrapping Christmas gifts.
I got stopped at crafting too.
Crafting. I wrap my gifts in a
I thought
different
crafting was okay in the bedroom.
This is a G-rated podcast.
Talking about crafting.
Those were things that like are easy, like for me, easy in terms of sleep, like not difficult, not giving anything up. I personally leave my phone downstairs in the bedrooms upstairs. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear it. If there's an emergency, somebody will call. It won't be a text. It won't be a notification.
Yeah.
Scott has his phone, which he chooses to, but I choose to not bring my phone with me. But we talked about the eating and drinking thing, and that was all kind of going around in my head because I have convinced myself that dessert at night helps me sleep.
It might make you feel tired.
But the quantity seems to matter.
Yes, very much so.
If I have a square of chocolate, there's not a sleep. If I have a pint of ice cream, I'm probably going to have indigestion and not sleep well and overheat during the night.
Yep.
But something like having a square of chocolate, probably appropriate. But what you brought up, even about television and stuff. So a confession, we binge watch Netflix or other stuff in the evenings. And every now and then we run out of a show. And Sarah and I watch a lot of the same TV. We'll finish a show. And for a couple weeks until we find something new, we just sit and talk.
Oh, that's so nice.
Well, that sounds nice.
I sleep so much better. A television doesn't go on. Sometimes we'll listen to music or Pandora, but a television. And when I'm going over this in my head, Sarah, as you say it, I realize I'm like, I sleep way better on the nights that we just sit and have a conversation until we get tired, whether that's at 8:30 or 9:15, rather than staying up, watching something, turning off Netflix, throwing the wrappers away from ice cream, whatever it is, and going to bed. So there's so much truth to what you said,
Yeah.
but a little bit of denial over here.
Well, I mean, it's just like any habit though, right? Like it takes some time to establish. If it is something that you do indeed want to work on, it takes some time to establish. I mean, honestly, I'm the same way. I can't imagine like what would I be doing for an hour before I actually go to bed if it wasn't sitting in front of the television. Like I don't want to be active, I don't want to be like doing my dishes or anything like that. I mean, there are answers, reading a book, doing your crafting, all sorts of things like that that you could use to take time that don't have screens.
I don't craft, by the way, just so I don't want to mislead anybody. Crafting to me is poorly wrapping Christmas gifts.
That's what I was referring to.
I just don't want to leave a scissor on the bed.
That's what I was referring to. But just like anything, you just have to do it one time and then you have to do it another time. And it is interesting. I mean, kind of back to, I can't remember if we talked about this earlier, if it's just a conversation that we were having, but, back to you in that conversation, Gillian, realized some of your habits and already saw some of those connections with them just by listening,
Yep.
And it's bringing awareness to some of those things is such a important beginning piece of changing behaviors, because you got to know what you're doing before you can make a change to them.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's start to wrap things up. I know whenever I start to wrap things up with Gillian, she gets like 9 other great ideas to talk about.
We didn't talk about social media yet.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I really think we should do a separate social media episode at some point, because that's a whole thing that I know we both navigated, or all three of us have probably navigated, and have moments of it being good and moments bringing value and have moments of it robbing us of value. So anyway, I want to do a little bit of a recap just to make sure we have a summary of suggestions and advice that we can offer everybody to spend more time in a place where we're content with what we're doing. We're aware of what we're doing and we're making the choice not to decide if it's good or bad. So one of those was being more present in the moment, not deciding to look back and decide if anything was good or bad, and not deciding to wish for things in the future. And stuff like journaling, I think, can really help that, because you become very aware of what is immediately around you and you have a place to write something down that will keep you in the present. So if you need to get more crafting supplies, if you need to go shopping for eggs, if you need to make an important phone call, you can put that in your journal instead of it waking you up in the middle of the night. We talked about the importance of structure, waking up and working out, or having something in your calendar, having a consistent alarm clock so you don't have to look at your phone and set it every time, but something that you can rely on that you're going to do, almost every day, or at least 4 times a week. If you're feeling like you're floundering, like give yourself that purpose. Talked about the importance of sleep. Oh, you know what? There's a good book about sleep called Why We Sleep. If you want to get into the science of all those restorative processes and everything around it that creates good behaviors, Why We Sleep is an excellent one. What else? Did I miss anything, ladies? Can't tell if it's delay or if it's just silence, but I think I did an okay job of summing that up.
I think you did a great job.
I think you did an excellent job of summarizing all of that. It made me want to talk about it more, but I think you did a great job.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, both of you, for being on here and talking about what's worked well for you and works well for your clients. And honestly, you two are such professionals and you're so great at what you do that I know that everything that you've talked about comes from your own interaction and how you use that to make yourselves better, and then how you use that to help everybody through times when they're trying to make changes. So thank you so much for sharing all that.
Thank you, Niki. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
This was very fun.
Thank you, Gillian. This was fun.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.